and welcome back to Workshop Wednesday. Now today we're going to actually do a step-by-step demonstration of how to do an original hem on a pair of jeans. Now this is a fun topic for me for a couple of reasons. First of all, one of my all-time pet peeves is when I see jeans that are obviously hemmed and you know that it was a homemade after the fact kind of job. And when I do any type of alteration, my number one goal is whether or not I'm changing the style is that the end result looks intended, that the garment looks like that's how it was intended and created from the beginning. And when it comes to jeans, just the way that the material rolls and the coloring throughout the hem, as well as oftentimes the thread and the stitching is just really difficult to recreate if you simply chop it off and fold it up like we can do on any other type of pants. So on a pair of jeans though, you can reattach the original hem, just set up a little higher. And some of you may know this already and may know how to do it, but there's a couple different ways of doing it like anything else in sewing. And there's a couple different steps that I always implement when I do this technique that just make the end result more comfortable to wear and more easy kind of to care for. So we're gonna go over all of those steps as well in the video today. Now, the other thing I wanted to share before I get going is, and I know some of you are going to laugh at this, is that I have realized that I must be maturing in my life. Now, I don't feel like I'm any older than I was 10 years ago, but I used to not care how long my jeans were. That's something my parents would always be like, stop walking on your pants or on the hem of your pants. And I'd be like, leave me alone. I don't care. I would rather have them long than too short. But today I cannot handle having my pants too long and stepping on the edge or the hem of my pants when I'm walking. So knowing how to really do a nice original looking finished hem on your jeans is like a must for me now. So let's pop down and actually look at the pair of jeans that I'm gonna hem. It's a pair of my jeans and I'm gonna hem them for us today and walk us through the process. Okay, so once we know how much we want to actually shorten the jeans, we're gonna turn them inside out and place them on our table. Now, when we go to measure the actual length and put our marking on, the first thing we wanna do is we wanna line up the side seam and the inseam together so that the front is doubled over on itself and the back is doubled over on itself. Whenever you're cutting a pair of pants, always line up the side seams rather than lining it up so that the front and the back is on top of each other and the side seams are on the side. This will just create a better result in any type of hem that you're going to do. And in some scenarios, you do want the back to be a little bit longer than the front, and a pair of shorts, for example, that will often be a little bit longer as well. So once we have our seams lined up, then what we're actually going to do is we're going to take the full length of that we want to shorten this pair of pants, and we're going to divide it by 2, and we're going to put a marking on the inside here from the top of the original stitching. So we're not measuring from the actual fold of the original hem, we're measuring from the top of where the original stitching goes. And on this particular pair, I want to shorten it 7 centimeters. So I'm just going to do the 3.5 and put a line all the way across. This particular hem is pretty straight, so I don't need to tilt it and adjust it. Sometimes you'll find when you line up your marking for the correct amount, here again 3.5, you might have to tilt it at this side seam to realign it with the stitching on your original hem. But here I can just keep it nice and straight. And then once you have that marked on, open it up real quick just to make sure that your transition line here on the front middle, we've totally just met up perfectly. Here on the back, my line got a little bit soft just from the color itself, but I also just want to make sure that this exact front, middle, and middle back, that there's a smooth transition. If you do have a little bit of a variation of a little bit extra length in the back. It may not be exactly squared off all the way along. You may have a little bit of a dip, but we don't want to have any kind of sharp angles, as we won't be able to create a nice hem in the back. It needs to be a nice soft transition over that front, middle, and back as well. Now, the reason when we measure, we're measuring just half of the distance, and we're measuring from the top of the stitching, is that since we're reattaching the original hem, we get to take out the entire amount we want to shorten from above that original hem. And we want to stitch right next to the stitching if at all possible. If your machine isn't strong enough, then you can stitch right along the edge of the original hem seam allowance, but you'll get a cleaner finish if you stitch through that seam allowance and through the material on the leg where you're folding it, as then the fold where you open it up will be directly next to that stitching and will be virtually invisible, especially when you have the jeans on and they're looking at your hem farther away, and you'll just be able to see the nice coloring and detail of that original hem, as well as the detail of the original stitching. Okay, here we are at the machine. Now, when picking your thread color for doing an original hem, the color you want to go with is whatever color blends with the actual fabric of the jean the closest. So whatever color you have that's going to disappear into the color and tone of the denim that you're working with, that's going to be the choice of color that you want to go with. Next, when we're sewing this first line, I'm going to leave the pant leg inside out because I'm just going to fold in this edge right to the line that I marked, which is again half of the fold distance that I want to shorten. So I'm just going to fold it in. Whenever I'm stitching a tight circle, so this leg is a fairly tight circle, I want to stitch it from the inside of the circle rather than from the outside, just so that my extra material, the other side of the circle, is on top and I can ensure that I'm not catching it underneath. We've all done that at one point or another when we've been stitching something closed, that we've caught the material underneath, that either the garment itself has tucked up or some other piece has sewn into or stitched into our seam as well, and that's just so frustrating. So when you sew on the inside of the circle, you have more control of knowing where that extra flap is and feeding it through the machine that way. So I always like to start at a seam, whether it be the inseam or the outside leg side seam, and you just want to place the garment so that your new stitch line is going to be directly on the inside of that original stitch line, so that you're running right next to it. You'll be going through quite a few layers of denim here, especially over the seam, so you may need to go slow, ensure that your needle is big enough, and just take it one kind of stitch at a time and circle all the way through, just keeping it folded right at that line that you created, so that you're taking off now the entire amount. Since we only did half to the line, then we have half and half, and then we can go from there. Okay, so after you have it all stitched all the way around, right next to your stitching or next to the seam allowance itself, depending on how much denim your machine can handle, the next thing you need to do is decide how you're going to deal with this extra material. So sometimes when you're only taking it up a little bit, you might not have that much hanging over and you can simply move on to the next step. However, here I have quite a big chunk on my hem now of extra material, and I'm just going to cut it off at about 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to serge mine because I have a serger or an overlocker available to me. Now, if you don't have a serger or an overlocker available, you can just cut it off again with a bit of seam allowance, about 1/2 inch. With a pinking shear, you can pink it and then zigzag stitch it. You can cut it off straight and then zigzag stitch it. or you can cut it off straight and add a little bit of bias tape, double folded bias tape, just to ensure that this edge isn't going to fray when you're washing it and wearing it. Jeans are something we have with us quite a while, and they get washed quite a few times. So we do want to ensure that if we do need to cut off extra when we're bringing it up, that we do finish off that edge. And it doesn't really matter exactly how much seam allowance you leave, but you'll want to have a little bit of something, and depending on how you're finishing off your edge will also dictate if you want to have a little bit more or less. But I'm going to just chop it off here at about 1/2 inch and then serge it up and move on to the next step. Okay, so now that I've finished off my cut edge with my chosen method, I'm once again going to stitch from the inside of the circle and top stitch just right along the edge of my new fold on this new seam. Okay, so now that I have both legs top stitched, I'm also going to just stitch in the ditch and attach the seam allowance both on the outer leg and the inner leg seam, or the inseam, just right next to where it's really thick. Just attach that seam allowance once again higher up so that it has no chance or ability to kind of roll over or flip around. You'll find that the top stitching, that really helps just lay that new seam on really nice and flat, and that seam allowance, keep it folded up against the leg and not rolling out. But we also are going to just stitch it one time here on the seam allowance on both sides, and that will also give us a little bit of extra security and support to make sure that that seam allowance isn't going to flip down and peek out at any point. So I like to just stitch again in the ditch of the side seam. So that just means it's kind of in the shadow of the side seam so that it's not noticeable at all. Once we do this, we're just going to give it a nice pressing, as that's always the number one rule to create a product that looks professional and well done. And then we'll take a peek at it. Okay, here we go. Look at this. We have our original hem reattached. We have all of the texture and coloring that the original denim hem has to offer, and even the stitching. And yet we've taken out that 7 centimeter chunk. Now on this particular pair of pants, even though we took out such a large amount, the size of the leg is still quite similar to, or basically the same as the circumference we had in the actual original hem itself. Now, due to the fact that especially in women's jeans and girls' jeans, there's usually some stretch to it, even if you do have somewhat of a flare and it's a little bit smaller where you're attaching that original hem, sometimes you can get away with not needing to take it in at all, and you can just kind of stretch the leg as you attach it, just ensuring that you keep kind of your side seam and your inseam aligned where they kind of cross over or connect with each other when you raise it. But other than that, the most important thing is to top stitch and then again attach that seam allowance. And if your machine just isn't strong enough to stitch through all of those layers, even next to the big thick area here with all of the seam allowances stacked on top of each other, then you can also attach this just by hand on the inside. But it just really helps that having that attached on either side to just ensure that that little bit of seam allowance isn't going to flip out on you when you're wearing it. That wraps up today's episode of Workshop Wednesday. I'm so excited to be able to wear my jeans now and not have to fold them up or be annoyed that they are always under my heel and underfoot. And I'd love to hear from you too if you have a comment or a pet peeve about how your jeans have to fit you to be comfortable and so that you love to wear them, and what kind of your favorite aspects are. I'd love to hear about that. And I'd also love it if you would join my Facebook group if you're not already part of that. Sew with Chelsea. I'll leave the link in the comments as well. And I look forward to seeing you next week on Workshop Wednesday.